Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale is a journey through courage, resilience, and the profound strength of the human spirit. Today, we bring you the story of Lucas, a young boy whose life on the streets led him to uncover a dark secret hidden within the walls of a powerful family's mansion. What begins as a desperate attempt to survive becomes a fight for justice, love, and freedom. This gripping tale reminds us of the power of determination and the bonds that can change lives. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Life Stories to start today's incredible journey. The bitter cold seeped into my bones as I huddled between two dumpsters in an alley off Fifth Avenue. The biting New York wind found every tear and hole in my sweater, leaving me shivering and awake. My name is Charlie, and at 14, I'd become as much a fixture of the streets as the stray cats that scavenged beside me. Hunger gnawed at my stomach with a persistent ache. But it was a familiar pain, one I had long since learned to ignore. Yet that morning, as the sun hesitated over the horizon, the hunger felt sharper, more urgent, as if my body were tired of enduring. I tightened my arms around my knees, trying to conserve what little warmth I could, and gazed at the busy bakery on the corner. Its yellow light spilled onto the pavement, the smell of fresh bread teasing me cruelly. My heart raced as I considered the thought that had been lingering in the back of my mind all night. I'd heard whispers among the other street kids about the Vanderbilt estate. Rumor had it that their kitchens were overflowing with food, and no one would notice a few missing scraps. It wasn't much of a plan, but desperation has a way of convincing you to take risks. By the time the sun was fully up, I had made my decision. My legs wobbled as I stood, stiff and cold from the night, but determination pushed me forward. I stayed close to the buildings, slipping through shadows and avoiding the growing crowds as I made my way uptown. I knew exactly where the estate was. Everyone did. The Vanderbilt family was the kind of powerful that made people lower their voices when they spoke of them. Their mansion stood like a fortress amidst the bustling city, surrounded by iron gates and guarded by men who seemed carved from stone. When I arrived, I lingered in the park across the street, studying the estate like a hunter watching prey. The guards at the gate looked bored, their movements routine. My heart pounded as I waited for a delivery truck to approach. Timing was everything. As the gates opened and the truck entered, I darted across the street, slipping in just before the gates clanged shut behind me. My breathing was ragged, but I forced myself to move quickly, skirting along the side of the mansion where I spotted a slightly open window near the kitchen. The smell hit me first, rich, warm, and intoxicating. My stomach growled loudly as I hoisted myself up and squeezed through the window. I landed softly on the tiled floor, my bare feet making no sound as I crept forward. The kitchen was larger than any room I'd ever been in, with shelves lined with food and baskets of fresh produce spilling over onto the counters. For a moment, I just stood there, overwhelmed by the sheer abundance. My hand reached out for a loaf of bread, my fingers trembling as I tore off a piece and stuffed it into my mouth. The taste was almost too much, tears springing to my eyes as I chewed quickly. But then, just as I reached for more, a sound stopped me cold, a muffled cry coming from somewhere deeper in the house. I froze, the bread still in my hand, straining to hear. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd expect in a place like this. It was soft and broken, the sound of someone in pain. I told myself to ignore it, to focus on what I came for and leave. But my feet began to move on their own, carrying me toward the sound. Curiosity and a strange sense of dread pulled me forward. The crying led me to a heavy wooden door at the end of a hallway. It looked out of place, its steel reinforcements stark against the elegance of the rest of the mansion. I pressed my ear against it, and the sound grew louder, a woman's voice, hoarse and pleading, mixed with the faint wail of a baby. My stomach churned as I pushed the door open. The basement was dimly lit, the air damp and suffocating. I descended the stairs cautiously, each creak of the wood beneath my feet loud in the oppressive silence. And then I saw her. A woman, pale and gaunt, sat slumped against the wall, her arms wrapped protectively around a small bundle. Chains shackled her wrists, their heavy links glinting in the faint light. Her eyes, hollow and sunken, widened when she saw me. "Who are you?" she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say. My mouth opened and closed, the words failing me as I stared at her. The baby in her arms let out a weak cry, and she shushed it gently, her hands trembling. "Please," she said after a moment, her voice breaking. "Help me. Don't let him find me here." "Who?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking as much as my hands. "Walter," she whispered, her face contorting in fear. "He's keeping us here. He'll kill us if he finds out you've seen us." Walter Vanderbilt. The name sent a chill down my spine. I had never met him, but his reputation was enough to make my blood run cold. This wasn't just a man. He was a force, untouchable and ruthless. I stepped closer, my mind racing. "Why are you here? Why would he do this?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have time to explain. Please. Just get help. Tell someone. Anyone. Promise me." I swallowed hard, the weight of her desperation pressing down on me. "I promise," I whispered, though I wasn't sure how I would keep it. As I backed away, my heart pounding, I realized the enormity of what I had stumbled into. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about survival, not mine, but hers. And something deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, told me I couldn't walk away. The cold air hit my face as I slipped back out through the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The mansion loomed behind me like a sleeping beast. But I knew it wasn't asleep. Somewhere inside, Walter Vanderbilt held the keys to its dark secrets, and he would stop at nothing to keep them buried. My legs felt shaky as I darted through the shadows of the estate, my mind a tangled mess of fear and determination. The woman's face was burned into my memory, her hollow cheeks, her trembling hands, the desperation in her voice. And the baby, the tiny, fragile bundle she clung to with every ounce of strength she had left. They needed help, and I had no idea how to give it to them. As I made it back to the street, the city greeted me with its usual indifference. Cars honked, people rushed by, and the smell of exhaust and hot pretzels filled the air. For a moment, I just stood there, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me. Who could I tell? Who would even believe me? I was just a street kid, a nobody. But I had made a promise, and I wasn't going to break it. My mind raced as I thought of the only person who might take me seriously, Emily Carter, a journalist who had a reputation for exposing powerful men. I'd heard her name whispered on the streets, stories about how she'd gone toe-to-toe with city officials and come out victorious. If anyone could take on Walter Vanderbilt, it was her. I didn't know exactly where to find her, but I remembered hearing she worked for the Tribune, a small independent paper on the Lower East Side. It wasn't much of a lead, but it was all I had. I pulled my ragged sweater tighter around me and began walking, keeping to the edges of the sidewalk where I wouldn't draw attention. Every step felt heavier than the last, the enormity of what I was about to do sinking in. If I went through with this, I'd be putting myself in Walter's crosshairs. But the memory of the woman's pleading eyes kept pushing me forward. The Tribune's building was nothing like the grand office towers that dominated Midtown. It was a rundown, three-story structure with peeling paint and a faded sign hanging above the door. My stomach churned as I approached, my fingers brushing against the photo of my mother in my pocket. I needed her strength now more than ever. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and ink. The sound of clacking typewriters filled the room, and journalists bustled around with papers and notebooks in hand. I hesitated by the door, feeling out of place among the chaos. A receptionist glanced at me with a raised eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone clipped. "I need to see Emily Carter." I said, my voice firmer than I felt. It's important. She gave me a skeptical look. Do you have an appointment? No, I admitted, swallowing hard. But I have information she'll want to hear. The receptionist rolled her eyes but picked up the phone, speaking into it in hushed tones. After a moment, she sighed and waved me toward a hallway. Third door on the left. Make it quick. I nodded and hurried down the hallway, my palms sweating. When I reached the door, I paused, taking a deep breath to steady myself before knocking. A voice called out, "Come in," and I pushed the door open. Emily Carter was seated at a cluttered desk, her auburn hair pulled back into a messy bun and her green eyes scanning a pile of papers. She looked up as I entered, her expression shifting from curiosity to skepticism as she took in my appearance. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Charlie," I said, stepping closer. "I need your help. There's a woman, she's being held prisoner in the Vanderbilt mansion. She has a baby with her." Emily's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" I hesitated, my hand instinctively going to the photo in my pocket before I stopped myself. "No," I admitted. "But I saw her. She's chained in the basement." She begged me to help her. Emily studied me for a long moment, her gaze piercing. "You're asking me to take on one of the most powerful families in the city based on the word of a kid who looks like he hasn't eaten in days. Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm not lying," I said, my voice trembling with urgency. "I don't have anything to gain from this. If I wanted to make up a story, I'd pick an easier target than Walter Vanderbilt." She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "All right, Charlie. Let's say I believe you. What exactly do you expect me to do?" "Expose him," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "You're the only one who can. If you don't, no one will." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "If I'm going to help you, I'll need more than just your word. We need evidence, something undeniable. Can you get back into the mansion?" The thought made my stomach turn, but I nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she reached for a notepad, scribbling something down. "All right, kid. You've got guts. I'll give you that. We'll need a plan, and fast. If you're right, that woman doesn't have much time." For the first time since I left the mansion, a flicker of hope stirred in my chest. I wasn't alone anymore. We were going to fight back. And this time, Walter Vanderbilt wouldn't see it coming. The hours after meeting Emily Carter passed in a blur of planning, nerves, and growing determination. Her small office became our war room. Papers spread across the desk and maps pinned to the walls. Emily worked with a focus that was both inspiring and intimidating, jotting down notes and rattling off questions. She didn't treat me like a street kid or a liability, she treated me like someone whose voice mattered. "Walter Vanderbilt is a fortress of power," Emily said, leaning over a map of the mansion she'd sketched from memory. "Taking him down will require precision and proof. You can't just walk into a courtroom and point fingers." "I know," I said, gripping the edge of the desk. "That's why I'm going back in. I can get the proof we need." Emily raised an eyebrow, her skepticism softening into something closer to concern. "You understand what you're saying, right? If they catch you, they won't hesitate to make you disappear." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "I promised her," I said quietly. "I can't turn back now." Emily nodded slowly, her gaze steady. "All right. We'll do this together. But first, we need to understand what we're up against." She began listing what we'd need: a distraction, a way in, and a way to document everything. Her confidence was contagious. But beneath it all, I could sense the tension. This wasn't just a story for her, it was a battle against everything the Vanderbilts represented. By the time the plan was taking shape, it was nearly dawn. Emily handed me a small camera and a recorder. "This is your lifeline," she said, her tone firm. Document everything. Every room. Every face. Every word. If anything happens, this is what will tell the world what's going on inside that house. I nodded, slipping the devices into my pockets. What about you? I asked. What's your role in this? I'll be your backup, she said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. If something goes wrong, I'll create enough noise to make Walter wish he'd stayed out of the public eye. Her confidence gave me a strange sense of calm. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance not just to survive, but to make a real difference. Still, as I left her office and walked through the city streets, the enormity of what I was about to do pressed down on me. I was heading back into the belly of the beast. The Vanderbilt mansion loomed larger than life as I approached, its dark windows reflecting the early morning light. Emily had arranged for a distraction, a delivery truck that would block the main gate and draw the guards' attention. It was risky, but it was our best shot. I slipped through the side gate, my heart pounding in my chest. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the rustling of leaves in the wind. My fingers brushed against the camera in my pocket, a reminder of what I was there to do. The kitchen window was still slightly ajar from my last visit, and I slipped inside with practiced ease. The scent of stale bread and cold meat lingered in the air, but I didn't pause to take it in. My focus was on the basement, the place where the woman and her baby were trapped. I moved quickly but cautiously, keeping to the shadows and listening for any sign of movement. The house was eerily quiet, its grand hallways and ornate furnishings feeling more like a tomb than a home. When I reached the basement door, my hands trembled as I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sounds from the other side. There was a faint noise, a soft hum, almost like a lullaby. It was her. I pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the hinges making me wince. The air was damp and heavy, the dim light casting long shadows across the stone walls. At the far end of the room, the woman sat cradling her baby, her eyes hollow but alert. "Charlie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her expression shifted from fear to hope as she recognized me. "You came back." "I promised I would," I said, stepping closer. "We're going to get you out of here." She shook her head, her grip tightening on the baby. "You shouldn't have come. They'll find you." "They won't," I said firmly, though the pounding of my heart suggested otherwise. "But I need your help. Is there any way to prove what's happening here? Anything I can take to show the world?" Her gaze darted around the room before settling on a small locked cabinet in the corner. "There," she said, her voice trembling. "Walter keeps everything there, photos, papers, tapes. But it's locked." I moved toward the cabinet, examining the heavy lock. It was sturdier than anything I'd dealt with before, but desperation fueled my determination. I pulled out a small knife I'd hidden in my sock and began working on the lock, my hands shaking with effort. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, with a satisfying click, the lock gave way, and the cabinet swung open. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence, files, photographs, and a small stack of tapes labeled with dates and names. "This is it," I said, stuffing the items into my bag. "This is what we need." But just as I turned back toward the woman, a sound froze me in place, the unmistakable creak of footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming. My stomach dropped, fear coursing through me like ice. "Hide," I whispered urgently to the woman, but she shook her head. "There's nowhere to go," she said, her voice resigned. "Take the baby. Save him." I stared at her, panic rising in my chest. "I'm not leaving you, Charlie," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto mine. "If you want to stop him, you have to go now." Before I could respond, the basement door began to open, and the shadows of two figures spilled down the stairs. My mind raced. There was no way out, at least. None that didn't involve risking everything. The basement door creaked open slowly, and the shadows of two guards stretched long across the floor. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman held the baby tightly, her body trembling but her gaze fixed with determination. She whispered one last plea, her voice barely audible over the sound of the footsteps descending the stairs. "Go," she urged. "Save him. Don't let him grow up in this nightmare." I hesitated for the briefest moment, torn between her desperation and my growing sense of responsibility. But there was no time to argue. I nodded sharply, tucking the evidence-filled bag securely over my shoulder and reaching for the baby. She handed him to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. His small, fragile body felt impossibly light in my arms, and the gravity of the situation pressed heavily on my chest. The guards were closer now, their voices low but distinct. "You sure you heard something down here?" one of them asked. "Yeah. And if it's that kid? He's not getting out this time," the other replied with a harsh laugh. I scanned the room frantically for a way out, my pulse racing. The woman pointed toward a narrow ventilation shaft near the far wall. It was barely wide enough for a small person to crawl through, but it was the only chance we had. With a deep breath, I nodded and began to move. The shaft's opening was covered by a rusted grate, and I pried it loose with shaking hands, trying not to make any noise. The baby stirred slightly, his soft whimper threatening to give us away. I whispered soothingly, desperate to keep him calm. The woman's eyes met mine one last time, her gaze a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Go," she mouthed silently. With the baby cradled tightly in one arm, I slipped into the shaft, inching forward as quietly as I could. The cold, metal walls pressed against my sides, and the sound of my own labored breathing filled my ears. Behind me, I heard the guards reach the bottom of the stairs. "Hey! The lock's broken," one of them shouted. "He's been here." I forced myself to keep moving, the urgency of their voices spurring me forward. The shaft twisted and turned, and I struggled to navigate with the baby in my arms. Every muscle in my body ached. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. At last, I saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The shaft led to a vent that opened into the backyard of the mansion. I pushed against the metal grate, wincing as it creaked loudly. Behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed closer. With one final shove, the grate fell away, and I tumbled out onto the damp grass, clutching the baby protectively. The cold night air stung my face, but I didn't pause to savor the relief. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the bag slapping against my side with every step. The mansion's sprawling gardens stretched before me, a maze of hedges and towering trees. I darted between them, keeping low and moving as quickly as I could. My mind raced with a single thought: get out, get out, get out. In the distance, I spotted the high stone wall surrounding the estate. If I could just reach it, I'd have a chance to escape. But the sound of shouting behind me told me the guards weren't far off. They'd discovered the open shaft, and now they were hunting me. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, the baby's weight feeling heavier with each passing second. He let out a soft cry, and I whispered frantically to calm him. "Sure, it's okay," I murmured. "We're almost there." The wall loomed closer, its surface slick with moss and dew. I reached it and searched desperately for a foothold. There, a section where the stone jutted out slightly, just enough for me to climb. I shifted the baby carefully, holding him close to my chest as I began to scale the wall. The shouting grew louder. The guards were closing in. "Come on. Come on," I muttered through gritted teeth, my fingers scraping against the rough stone. My arms trembled with the effort, but I forced myself to keep climbing. The top of the wall was just within reach. A shot rang out, the sound slicing through the night like a whip. I froze for a split second, my heart nearly stopping. They were firing at me. Another shot. This one closer, chipped the stone just inches from my head. Adrenaline surged through me. And with a final burst of strength, I hauled myself over the wall, landing hard on the other side. Pain shot through my legs as I hit the ground. But I ignored it. I clutched the baby tightly and ran, the dense forest outside the mansion providing some cover. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred with exhaustion. Behind me, the guards shouted, but their voices grew fainter as I pushed deeper into the woods. Finally, when my legs could carry me no further, I collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak tree. The baby was silent, his tiny face nestled against my chest. My entire body shook, and tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "We made it," I whispered, my voice cracking. "We made it out." But as I sat there in the darkness, cradling the baby and clutching the stolen evidence, I knew this was only the beginning. The fight against Walter Vanderbilt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The forest was eerily silent as I pressed my back against the rough bark of the oak tree, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The baby shifted slightly in my arms, his soft whimper the only sound cutting through the darkness. My legs trembled from the effort of running, and my mind raced with questions I couldn't yet answer. How far behind were the guards? Could they track us through the woods? And where could we go from here? I glanced at the bag slung across my shoulder, its weight a constant reminder of what I carried, the evidence of Walter Vanderbilt's crimes, every document and tape a nail in the coffin of his corrupt empire. But getting out of the mansion with it had been the easy part. Now, the challenge was finding someone who could use it. The baby stirred again, and I instinctively tightened my grip on him. His face, soft and innocent, shone faintly in the moonlight filtering through the trees. A sense of overwhelming responsibility swept over me. It wasn't just about the evidence anymore. It was about him, too. I had to keep him safe, no matter the cost. Voices carried faintly through the trees, breaking my thoughts. The guards were still searching, their shouts punctuated by the occasional snap of branches. I had to move. Pushing myself up, I adjusted the baby in my arms and slung the bag over my back. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, its shadows shifting like restless phantoms. I chose a direction at random and began walking, my steps careful and deliberate. Each crunch of leaves underfoot felt deafening, but I had no other choice. The night wore on as I made my way through the dense undergrowth. My body ached, and my mind teetered on the edge of exhaustion. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. Every time I thought of resting, the image of the guards bursting through the trees spurred me forward. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood a weathered wooden cabin, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. I hesitated, peering into the gloom. It looked abandoned, but I couldn't be sure. The baby let out a soft cry, his hunger and discomfort finally breaking through. I knew I had to risk it. We needed shelter, even if only for a little while. Carefully, I approached the cabin, my senses on high alert. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the musty scent of damp wood and dust greeted me. Inside, the small space was cluttered with broken furniture and discarded belongings. A table leaned precariously against the wall, and a single chair lay toppled on its side. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners, undisturbed for years. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I set the baby down gently on a pile of old blankets I found in the corner, his tiny body curling instinctively into the soft fabric. He looked up at me with wide, curious eyes, and for a moment, the weight of the situation lifted slightly. I smiled at him, though my hands still trembled. "We're okay," I whispered. "Just for now. We're okay." I rummaged through the bag, pulling out a canteen of water and a small packet of crackers I'd swiped from the mansion's kitchen. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I took a sip of the water before carefully feeding a few drops to the baby, who accepted them greedily. His tiny hand reached out, clutching weakly at my finger. and my chest tightened with an emotion I couldn't quite place. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world outside the cabin was quiet. I allowed myself to sit for a moment, leaning against the wall as the adrenaline began to fade. My body ached, and the scratches on my arms and legs stung from the forest's unforgiving grasp. But I couldn't afford to rest for long. I thought of Sarah, still trapped in the mansion. Her desperate eyes haunted me, and her whispered plea echoed in my mind. She'd trusted me to save her baby, to protect the only part of her life she still had control over. And I'd promised her I would come back. The sound of a distant howl snapped me out of my thoughts. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to listen. It wasn't the guards, at least. I didn't think it was. But the forest was alive with unseen dangers. And I couldn't let my guard down. I stood, pacing the small cabin as I tried to come up with a plan. Emily would know what to do. The journalist had a reputation for exposing the truth, no matter the risk. If I could find her, she could help us. But the thought of navigating the city again, with the Vanderbilt family undoubtedly searching for me, made my stomach churn. The baby stirred again, his small cries growing louder. I knelt beside him, cradling him in my arms as I tried to soothe him. "Sure, it's okay," I murmured, though the words felt hollow. I didn't know if anything was okay. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine rumbled faintly in the distance. My entire body tensed, and I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the baby tightly. The headlights of a vehicle cut through the trees, growing brighter as it approached the clearing. My breath hitched. Had the guards found me? The car came to a stop just outside the cabin, its engine idling. I held my breath, every muscle in my body taut as I waited for the worst. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted against the faint glow of the moon. "Lucas," a familiar voice called. Low but urgent. It was Emily. Relief flooded through me as I stepped cautiously toward the door. Still holding the baby, Emily's face came into focus, her expression a mix of worry and determination. "We don't have much time," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "They're looking everywhere for you. But I have a safe house, somewhere we can regroup and figure out our next move." I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. "Thank you," I managed to say, my gratitude overwhelming. Emily's eyes softened as she looked at the baby in my arms. "You've done well, Lucas," she said. "But we have a long fight ahead of us." And with that, we climbed into the car and sped off into the night, leaving the cabin and the dangers of the forest behind us. The car hummed steadily as it cut through the quiet, winding roads leading away from the clearing. Emily drove with the precision of someone who had navigated dangerous paths before. Her eyes flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, scanning for any sign of pursuit. I sat in the back seat, cradling the baby, the weight of exhaustion finally settling into my bones. The interior of the car was dimly lit, the faint glow of the dashboard lights casting long shadows across Emily's face. She looked worn but determined, her sharp features softened by the occasional glance toward me and the child. "I know a place," Emily said, her voice low but steady. "It's not far. And it's secure. We'll be safe there for the night." I nodded, grateful but too drained to respond. My thoughts raced with questions about what would come next. Where was Sarah now? Had the guards retaliated for the baby's disappearance? And most pressing, how could we take the evidence I carried and turn it into justice for everyone Walter Vanderbilt had wronged? The baby stirred in my arms, his tiny fingers curling and uncurling as if grasping for comfort. I stroked his cheek gently, marveling at the innocence he carried despite the chaos surrounding him. He didn't know about the dangers we faced or the sacrifices made to protect him. He was just a baby, trusting me with a weight that felt almost unbearable. "You're doing well," Emily said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice carried a warmth that surprised me. "Not everyone would have the courage to do what you've done." "I don't feel brave," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I feel lost. Like I'm making it up as I go. Emily's lips curved into a small, understanding smile. That's what bravery looks like sometimes. It's not about having all the answers. It's about moving forward even when you don't. Her words settled over me like a fragile comfort. I thought back to the moment I'd discovered the basement. The desperation in Sarah's eyes when she handed me her child. And the way my feet had moved before my mind could catch up. I didn't know if I was brave or just desperate. But I knew one thing, I couldn't stop now. We turned onto a narrower road lined with trees that arched overhead. Their bare branches forming a skeletal canopy against the night sky. The safe house came into view, a small, unassuming cottage tucked away at the end of the path. Its windows were dark, and the faint outline of ivy crawled up its stone walls, blending it seamlessly into the forest around it. Emily parked the car and turned to me. We'll lay low here for the night. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to get this evidence to someone who can act on it. I followed her out of the car, the baby still cradled against me. The cottage door creaked as Emily pushed it open, revealing a modest interior with a worn couch, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom. It was simple, but it felt like a haven compared to the constant danger we'd faced. Emily moved swiftly, lighting a few candles and locking the door behind us. There's food in the pantry, she said, nodding toward the kitchen. It's not much, but it'll keep us going. I set the baby down on the couch, using my jacket to make a makeshift bed for him. His eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. For the first time in hours, I felt a sliver of hope. He was safe. At least for now. Emily pulled a chair to the small table in the corner, spreading out the documents and hard drives we'd taken from the Vanderbilt estate. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she scanned the pages, occasionally muttering to herself. This is enough to ruin him, she said finally, her voice tinged with satisfaction. Illegal transfers. Bribes. Details of cover-ups. He won't be able to explain any of this away. But how do we make sure it gets out? I asked, sinking into the chair across from her. Walter has connections everywhere. If we hand this over to the wrong person. I know. Emily interrupted, her tone sharp. We can't trust the police or the courts. Not yet. They're too tangled up in his web. But there are people, independent journalists, activists, who can amplify this. If we make enough noise, he won't be able to silence us. Her confidence was reassuring, but doubt still gnawed at the edges of my mind. Walter had operated above the law for years, his power seemingly untouchable. Would this really be enough to bring him down? As if sensing my hesitation, Emily reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. We'll make it happen, she said firmly. Walter Vanderbilt doesn't get to win. Not this time. Her resolve was contagious. I nodded, the spark of determination reigniting within me. We had the truth. And we had each other. That had to be enough. The baby let out a soft whimper, breaking the moment. I stood and moved to him, scooping him into my arms as he nuzzled against my shoulder. His warmth grounded me, reminding me why we were fighting so hard. We'll protect you, I murmured, more to myself than to him. We'll make sure you grow up in a world where people like Walter Vanderbilt can't hurt anyone else. Emily glanced over, her expression softening. And we'll start tomorrow. Tonight. We rest. The three of us settled into the quiet cottage, the weight of the day pressing down but the promise of tomorrow holding us steady. For the first time in what felt like forever, we had a plan and a chance to see it through. The morning light crept in softly through the cottage's thin curtains, casting warm streaks across the room. I stirred on the small couch, the baby snug against my chest, his tiny hand curled around my shirt. He had slept soundly through the night, a small miracle in the midst of everything. His soft breaths reminded me of the quiet strength it took to carry on, even when the world around us felt like it was unraveling. Emily was already awake, seated at the table, meticulously sorting through the evidence we'd taken from the Vanderbilt estate. She had that same intensity in her eyes as the night before, her mind clearly working through the next steps. A steaming cup of coffee sat beside her, untouched, as she flipped through documents and cross-referenced names with some notes she had scribbled on a notepad. "How long have you been up?" I asked, my voice hoarse with sleep. She glanced up briefly and offered a faint smile. "Not long. There's just so much here. The more I read, the more I realize how deep this goes. Walter's influence is everywhere." I sat up carefully, cradling the baby as I stretched out my stiff limbs. "Is it enough, though, to take him down?" Emily hesitated, her fingers pausing on the edge of a page. "It's more than enough. If we can get this into the right hands, it'll be impossible for Walter to recover. But that's the challenge, finding the right hands. He has allies in places we haven't even considered." Her words sent a chill through me, but I knew she was right. Walter Vanderbilt wasn't just a man, he was an institution. One that had embedded itself into every facet of power and authority. Taking him down would require more than just evidence, it would require precision, timing, and luck. The sound of the door creaking open drew both of our gazes. Victor stepped in, his expression tired but resolute. He carried a small bag slung over his shoulder, and his jacket was damp from the morning dew. "I found a payphone a few miles out," he said, setting the bag on the table. "I made contact with a journalist I trust, a friend of Emily's. They're willing to meet us tonight." Emily straightened in her chair, her eyes lighting up with renewed energy. "Who?" "Her name's Rachel Carter," Victor replied. "She runs an independent news network, small but fearless. She's exposed corporate corruption before, and she's not afraid to stand up to people like Walter." Emily nodded approvingly. "Rachel's good. If anyone can get this story out, it's her." Victor glanced at me, his expression serious. "We'll need to be careful. If Walter gets wind of this, he won't hesitate to send his men after us again. The meeting place is secluded, but we'll have to stay on high alert." I shifted the baby in my arms, feeling the weight of the responsibility we carried. "When and where?" "Tonight. Just after sunset," Victor said. "An abandoned warehouse near the docks. It's risky, but it's the safest place Rachel could arrange on short notice." Emily began packing up the documents and hard drives, her movements swift and purposeful. "We'll need to leave early," she said. "The docks are a long drive, and I want to make sure we scout the area before the meeting." The gravity of the situation pressed down on us, but there was also a sense of momentum, of purpose. We were no longer running aimlessly. We had a destination, a plan, and a chance to fight back. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Victor and Emily mapped out the route to the docks, carefully avoiding main roads and checkpoints where Walter's men might be stationed. I took care of the baby, feeding him with the supplies Emily had stashed in the cottage and keeping him entertained with soft hums and gentle rocking. He smiled at me a few times, a toothless grin that felt like a small victory in itself. By late afternoon, we were ready. The baby was bundled up in a warm blanket, his tiny head resting against my shoulder. Emily carried the backpack filled with evidence, her determined expression giving me confidence. Victor drove, his knuckles white against the steering wheel as we navigated the narrow, winding roads out of the forest. The drive to the docks was tense but uneventful. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. By the time we reached the warehouse, the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, the last traces of daylight fading into darkness. The warehouse loomed before us, its rusted exterior and broken windows giving it an eerie, abandoned feel. Victor parked the car a safe distance away, and we approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater and oil, the sounds of distant waves breaking against the docks adding to the atmosphere. Rachel was waiting inside, a tall woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. She wore a leather jacket and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years fighting battles no one else dared to take on. "Victor," she greeted, her voice low but warm. "And Emily. It's been a while. Too long." Emily replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for meeting us." Rachel's gaze shifted to me, her expression softening when she saw the baby. "You must be the one who started all this," she said. "The one who found Sarah." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and unease. "We have the evidence," I said, gesturing to Emily's bag. "Everything we need to bring Walter down." Rachel's eyes narrowed with determination. "Then let's get to work." As we began to lay out the evidence and discuss the plan for the broadcast, I felt a spark of hope reignite within me. We were no longer just survivors. We were fighters. And tonight, we would take the first step toward justice. The air inside the warehouse was heavy with tension, each sound amplified by the cavernous space. The baby whimpered softly in my arms, and I gently rocked him, hoping to soothe him and mask my own nerves. Rachel worked quickly, setting up a small camera on a tripod and unpacking a laptop and microphone. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed, as though she had done this kind of work countless times before. "This isn't just about showing the evidence," Rachel said, her voice firm but calm. "We have to paint the full picture, show the human cost of what Walter Vanderbilt has done. If we don't make people care, this could all get swept under the rug." Emily nodded, organizing the papers and hard drives on the table. "That's why we brought everything. Documents, recordings, Sarah's story, it's all here. There's no way anyone can ignore this." Victor stood by the entrance, peering out through a crack in the door. His posture was tense, his shoulders hunched, and his hand rested on the small pistol tucked into his waistband. He had insisted on carrying it, despite Emily's protests. "We're putting a target on ourselves tonight," he had said earlier. "I'm not going to be caught unprepared." Now, as we prepared to go live, I could see the strain in his face, the weight of everything we had been through. He turned to me and gave a small nod. "We're running out of time. Walter's people might already be looking for us." "We're ready," Rachel announced, adjusting the camera angle. She looked at Sarah, who sat quietly with the baby in her lap, her face pale but resolute. "Sarah, are you sure you want to do this? Once your face is out there, there's no turning back." Sarah lifted her chin, her gaze steady. "It's not about me anymore. It's about my son. About making sure Walter can't hurt anyone else. I'll do whatever it takes." Rachel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. We're going live in 5 minutes." I felt my pulse quicken as Rachel started the final preparations. The plan was simple: a live broadcast that would bypass traditional media and stream directly to independent news channels and social media platforms. It was risky if Walter's people intercepted the signal or found us before the broadcast ended. Everything we had worked for could be lost. But it was our best shot at exposing the truth. Emily stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folder of documents. "I'll start with the financial records," she said. "Once we've established the scope of Walter's corruption, we'll move to the recordings and Sarah's testimony." Rachel adjusted the microphone and gestured for Emily to stand in front of the camera. "You're on first," she said. "Keep it clear and concise. We need to grab people's attention right away." Emily nodded and took a deep breath. As the camera's red light blinked on, she straightened her posture and began to speak. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "My name is Emily Carter, and tonight, we bring you the truth about Walter Vanderbilt, a man whose wealth and power have shielded him from justice for far too long." Her words were sharp and deliberate, each one cutting through the silence like a blade. She held up a sheet of paper, the bold numbers and signatures visible even on the grainy feed. "These are financial records linking Walter Vanderbilt to illegal transactions, bribes, and payoffs. For years, he has used his influence to silence his enemies, manipulate the system, and amass a fortune built on corruption. As Emily spoke, Rachel monitored the stream on her laptop, her expression grim but focused. "The numbers are climbing," she murmured. "People are watching." Victor moved closer to Sarah and me, his voice low. "We need to be ready to move if something goes wrong. Stay close." I nodded, my grip tightening on the baby. My eyes flicked to Sarah, who was watching Emily with a mixture of admiration and determination. I could see the fire in her eyes, the strength that had carried her through years of captivity. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. Emily finished her segment and stepped aside, her face flushed with adrenaline. Rachel gestured for Sarah to take her place. "It's time," she said gently. Sarah stood, holding the baby close as she approached the camera. For a moment, she hesitated, her gaze flickering to me, then to Victor. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, and she turned to face the lens. "My name is Sarah Vanderbilt," she began, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "For 6 years, I was held prisoner in my own home by my husband, Walter Vanderbilt. He controlled every aspect of my life, isolating me from the world and using our son as leverage to keep me silent." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I'm not silent anymore. Tonight, I'm telling my story not just for myself, but for every person who has suffered because of Walter's greed and cruelty." Rachel gave her a reassuring nod, and Sarah continued, recounting the details of her captivity and the abuse she had endured. Her words were raw and unflinching, painting a vivid picture of the horrors she had faced. As she spoke, the baby stirred in her arms, his small hand reaching up to touch her face. It was a simple, tender gesture, but it carried a weight that words couldn't convey. When Sarah finished, the room fell silent, the gravity of her story settling over us like a heavy blanket. Rachel ended the broadcast and turned to us, her expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "It's out there," she said. "The whole world knows now." But before we could celebrate, the sound of tires screeching outside sent a jolt of fear through the room. Victor rushed to the window, his face pale. "They found us," he said grimly. "We need to go. Now." The adrenaline surged back, and I tightened my grip on the baby as we scrambled to gather our things. The fight wasn't over yet. We had exposed the truth. But Walter Vanderbilt wasn't going down without a fight. The sound of tires screeching outside was like a bolt of electricity shooting through the room. Victor stepped back from the window, his expression grim. "There are at least 3 vehicles. They'll be inside in minutes." Rachel closed her laptop, shoving it into a battered backpack. "We can't stay here," she said urgently. "They'll have every exit covered. We need to move before they box us in." Sarah, still holding the baby, looked at me, her face pale but steady. "What's the plan?" Victor was already moving, his mind clearly racing. He grabbed a small duffel bag from under the table, unzipping it to reveal flash drives, hard copies of the documents, and portable power banks. "We split up," he said firmly. "We can't afford to lose everything if they catch us. Sarah and the baby go with Rachel. I'll create a distraction to buy us time." "What about us?" I asked, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Victor turned to me, his expression serious. "You stick with Sarah and Rachel. If anything happens, your priority is keeping them safe and getting this evidence out." I nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling on my shoulders. "Got it." Rachel pulled out a set of keys, tossing them to Victor. "The van is parked 2 blocks south. It's old, but it'll get you out of the area." Victor caught the keys, slipping them into his pocket. "I'll lead them away. You head north. There's a safe house Emily mentioned, near the old factory district. If we get separated, regroup there." The sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel outside signaled the arrival of Walter's men. My heart pounded as I helped Sarah to her feet. ensuring the baby was secure in her arms. Rachel slung the backpack over her shoulder, glancing at Victor one last time. "Don't do anything stupid," she said, her voice softer than usual. Victor gave a faint smile. "Stupid is the only reason we're still alive." With that, he opened the back door, slipping into the shadows. A few seconds later, the roar of the van's engine broke the silence, followed by shouts and the deafening crack of gunfire. The distraction had begun. "Let's go," Rachel urged, pulling Sarah and me toward the side exit. We moved quickly but cautiously, sticking close to the walls and keeping to the shadows. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, the faint smell of burning rubber lingering from the chase. My senses were on high alert, every sound magnified as we darted across the deserted alley. Rachel led us through a maze of side streets and abandoned lots, her movements quick and precise. I could hear Sarah's labored breathing beside me, the baby stirring but miraculously not crying. We reached the edge of an industrial park, the crumbling remnants of warehouses casting long, eerie shadows. "Keep moving," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're almost there." But just as we rounded a corner, a figure emerged from the darkness. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood blocking our path. The glint of a weapon in his hand sent a jolt of fear through me. Well, the man drawled, his voice laced with menace. "Looks like I caught the prize." Before I could react, Rachel stepped forward, her hands raised. "We don't want any trouble," she said evenly, her tone calm but firm. "Let us pass. And no one gets hurt." The man chuckled, raising his weapon slightly. "You think you can walk out of here after what you've done? Walter wants you alive. But I'm not feeling too patient tonight." Time seemed to slow as I calculated our options. My eyes flicked to the narrow alley behind him, the only way past. Sarah tightened her grip on the baby, her knuckles white. Rachel glanced at me, and in that split second, I knew what she was thinking. Without hesitation, Rachel lunged forward, swinging her backpack with surprising force. The man stumbled back, cursing as the bag hit his arm. I seized the opportunity, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the alley. "Go," I shouted. We ran, the sounds of scuffling and shouting echoing behind us. Rachel was buying us precious seconds, but I knew we couldn't waste them. My legs burned as we sprinted through the alley, weaving between piles of debris and rusted machinery. The factory loomed ahead, a towering structure of steel and shattered glass. "In here," I said, guiding Sarah toward a side door hanging loosely on its hinges. We slipped inside, the musty air and darkness enveloping us. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, while Sarah clutched the baby, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Do you think Rachel will be okay?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer, but I forced myself to nod. "She'll find us. She always does." The sound of footsteps outside made us freeze. I peered through a crack in the door, my heart sinking as I saw more of Walter's men combing the area. They were getting closer, their flashlights slicing through the night like knives. "We have to keep moving," I whispered, taking Sarah's hand again. The factory was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and crumbling walls, each corner offering a new hiding spot or a new danger. We moved silently, every step measured, every breath controlled. My mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. Suddenly, the baby let out a soft cry, breaking the silence. Sarah immediately tried to soothe him, but the sound had already given us away. The footsteps grew louder, the beams of flashlights bouncing off the walls. "This way," I said, spotting a staircase leading to an upper level. We climbed quickly, the metal steps creaking under our weight. At the top, I spotted an old maintenance door, its lock rusted and broken. I pushed it open, revealing a narrow walkway that led to another section of the building. "Go," I urged Sarah, helping her onto the walkway. We moved cautiously, the rickety platform swaying with each step. Below us, the men were searching methodically, their voices growing louder. As we reached the other side, I spotted an opening, a broken window leading to a fire escape. Relief flooded me as I guided Sarah through the gap, carefully handing her the baby before climbing out myself. The fire escape groaned under our weight, but it held. We descended quickly, the cold metal biting into my hands. At the bottom, we slipped into the shadows of the adjacent alley, our breaths visible in the chilly air. The sounds of the men faded into the distance. But I knew it wasn't over. "Where now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I scanned the area, my mind racing. "We keep going. We'll find Rachel. And then, we'll finish this." As we disappeared into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. But for Sarah and the baby, for all the lives Walter had destroyed, I was ready to face it. The winter days grew colder, yet the warmth inside the Monroe estate seemed to grow with every passing moment. John's progress continued steadily, each small victory reinforcing the bond between the people who had rallied around him. Emily found herself marveling at how much had changed, not only with John but with everyone who had played a role in his recovery. This morning, as Emily entered John's room, she noticed something immediately. His eyes were more focused, more present. Maximum, ever faithful, was perched on the pillow beside him, purring softly. Catherine was already there, reading aloud from one of John's favorite business books. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe," Emily said with her usual cheer. She approached the bed, gently touching his hand. "You're looking strong today. Let's see what new milestones we can reach." Catherine looked up, her face lit with a smile. "He's been tracking me with his eyes while I've been reading," she said. "It's like he's really listening now." Emily's heart swelled with pride. "That's wonderful. Let's build on that." The day's therapy session included something new. Emily encouraged John to respond with subtle head movements. "Let's start small," she said. "Tilt your head slightly to the left for yes and to the right for no." It took a few attempts. But then it happened. John's head moved, ever so slightly, to the left. Catherine gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "He's responding," she whispered. Emily's grin widened. "That's it. Mr. Monroe. Keep going. You're doing amazing." Catherine leaned closer, tears brimming in her eyes. "John," she said softly, "do you know how proud we are of you?" He moved his head to the left again, more confidently this time. Catherine let out a joyful laugh, and Emily felt tears of her own beginning to well up. These moments of progress had become a source of celebration for everyone in the house. That evening, as Emily documented John's achievements, Paul appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with 3 cups of tea. "I thought you might like this," he said, setting the tray down. "Thank you, Paul," Emily said with a smile. "It's been a day full of good news." Paul hesitated, then sat down across from her. "You've changed this house," he said quietly. "I've worked here for years, but I've never seen it like this. It feels alive again." Emily felt a wave of gratitude. "I think it's all of us," she said. "Catherine, you, Max, everyone has played a part." Paul nodded thoughtfully. "Still, it's your belief in him that made the difference." Over the next few weeks, John's improvements continued to surprise and delight them all. He began forming short words more clearly, and his head movements became a reliable form of communication. Catherine spent hours talking to him, sharing memories and even planning for the future. One afternoon, as snowflakes drifted lazily outside, Catherine turned to Emily with a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "I was thinking," she began, "we should start planning a small celebration. Something to mark how far we've come." Emily smiled. "That's a wonderful idea. It would be a chance for John to feel the love and support from everyone who's been rooting for him." Catherine nodded. "Exactly. We could invite a few close friends and the medical team who've been part of his journey. Nothing too overwhelming, but enough to remind him that he's not alone. Plans for the celebration quickly took shape. Paul coordinated with the staff to transform the estate's main hall into a warm and inviting space. Emily ensured that every detail was designed with John's comfort in mind, from the seating arrangements to the lighting. On the day of the celebration, the house buzzed with quiet excitement. Catherine chose a tailored suit for John, a symbol of his strength and resilience. Emily helped him prepare, ensuring he was comfortable and ready for the event. "You're the guest of honor today, Mr. Monroe," Emily said with a smile as she adjusted his scarf. "Are you ready to show everyone how far you've come?" John's head tilted slightly to the left, a clear yes. When they wheeled him into the main hall, a collective gasp filled the room. Friends and colleagues who hadn't seen John since the accident stared in awe at the man who had defied all odds. Catherine stood beside him, her voice steady as she addressed the gathering. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "Today is not just a celebration of John's progress but a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and hope." She turned to Emily, her eyes shining with gratitude. And none of this would have been possible without Emily. Her unwavering belief in John, her dedication, and her compassion have brought us to this moment. She's more than his nurse, she's become part of our family. Emily felt her cheeks flush as the room erupted in applause. As the evening continued, laughter and conversation filled the hall. Guests shared stories about John's past accomplishments, each memory a thread that connected him to the life he was slowly reclaiming. Later, as the celebration wound down, Catherine found Emily standing by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered garden. "You've given us more than we ever thought possible," Catherine said, her voice filled with emotion. Emily turned to her, smiling. "It's not just me. It's all of us, working together, believing in him." Catherine nodded, her eyes glistening. "Even so, you've shown us what it means to never give up. And because of you, we have hope again." As the night drew to a close, Emily helped wheel John back to his room. Max followed closely, leaping onto the bed as soon as they settled John in. "Good night, Mr. Monroe," Emily said softly. "You were incredible today." And as she stepped into the quiet of her own room, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been profoundly rewarding. Together, they had not only defied the odds but created something far greater, a family bound by love, resilience, and the belief that anything was possible. As the snow outside the Monroe estate glistened under the moonlight, the journey of resilience and love came full circle. John, once trapped in silence, now smiled and communicated with his family, proving that the human spirit can overcome even the greatest challenges. Catherine, transformed by the process, rediscovered not only her love for John but also her own strength and capacity for connection. Emily, whose dedication had been the cornerstone of this remarkable recovery, watched with pride as the family she had helped rebuild found new joy and purpose. The estate, once a place of stillness and sorrow, now echoed with laughter, warmth, and hope. John's story became a beacon of inspiration, reminding everyone that with love, patience, and unwavering belief, miracles are possible. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the Life Stories channel for more inspiring tales of resilience, hope, and the power of human connection. Together, we celebrate the extraordinary within the everyday. Stay tuned for more.